Hello everyone, my name is Neha and welcome to Chanakya Mandal Parivar's online courses. In this video, we are going to look at the era of Akbar, his Rajput policy, his religious policies, and later his revenue policies, civil administration, etc. We have dealt briefly with how Humayun had to left India because of his battles with the Afghan rulers and the Afghan interlude or the contributions of Sher Shah Sur. Now, after Humayun regained the power and then Akbar coming to throne, the Afghan menace had not stopped at that time. So Akbar had to fight a battle with the Afghan warrior Hemu, and this battle also happened at the same place where Babur had fought. This is the second battle of Panipat, which happened on 5th of November 1556, and this battle, along with his early consolidation and his fights with the Malwa rulers, the Rajasthan rulers and the rulers of Gujarat, is what consolidated Akbar's power and he became a powerful monarch in Delhi. And he is perhaps one of the most celebrated Mughal rulers of his times and also the times to come. Now, when we are talking about Akbar, we are going to focus on his Rajput policy and his religious policies rather than the political movements or various battles that he fought with those Rajput rulers. Instead of looking at various Rajput rulers individually, we will look at a consolidated Rajput policy that Akbar took up. Now, one of the reasons as to why Akbar became very successful in his attempts and why Akbar became also one of the powerful monarchs of his time so the roots of these has to find with one, Akbar's character, second, thoughtful and deliberate Rajput policy that Akbar has adopted, and third, his religious policy of his religious toleration. Before going into the religious policy of Akbar, we need to look at why Akbar wanted to expand his kingdom. Now, in the initial stages of his coming on throne, Akbar has also shown signs of a despotic monarch who would want to expand his kingdom for the sake of it. But there is a shift in his policies from where he deliberately makes an effort to be the national ruler, the national leader, and to consolidate the empire and to make it into one consolidated national empire. And the roots of which are found in his Rajput policy. Now, when we talk about the Rajput policies, we need to understand or we need to look at the role that Rajputs have historically played in the life of Akbar, or also in the Mughal royalty as such. The Rajputs have already been called as the sword arms of India. The Rajputs have fought valiantly for their motherlands and they've always been very great warriors. Now, what has happened is when the sultans and later the Mughals came to throne, the Rajputs are thrown outside the political center. They have been thrown outside the political sphere. And when we are talking about Akbar specifically, Akbar has made efforts to consolidate his empire, and in this attempt he has fought with very many Rajput leaders, very many Rajput rulers. But after that he has shifted his focus up and he has cooperated with the Rajputs. Why is that so? Because Akbar had to face internal rebellions, not only from and those internal rebellions he had to face from the Muslim section of the society, Muslim section of the royalty. So he realized that the religious tint that was given to Rajputs not being included in the Mughal polity is not true, because it's not only the Rajputs but also the Islamic nobles who also rebel against you, and that's why he has adopted a specific Rajput polity. Now, there are three types in which Akbar has dealt with these Rajput rulers. The first kind is the rulers like the rulers of Amber, Bikaner and Jaisalmer. These are the rulers who have accepted Akbar as their ruler, who have accepted to live under the suzerainty of Akbar. Amber specifically, Amber incidents has shaped a lot of things that Akbar has done in later times, even his religious policies. The Raja of Amber has married one of his daughters to Akbar, and the armies of Amber have fought valiantly alongside Akbar with when he fought with other kingdoms. So this is the first class of Rajput rulers with which Akbar dealt with. The second class is consisting of rulers like Ranthambore and Mirta, who have not accepted the suzerainty of Akbar at the first place. So Akbar had to fight with them. Akbar defeated them in the battlefields. But what Akbar did after the defeat is what makes Akbar, is what sets Akbar apart. Except from one incident where he has executed the people ruthlessly, Akbar has decided that he is not going to kill, or he is not going to execute the people after he defeats himself. So what he has made a deliberate attempt to restore the pride that the Rajput rulers had. So even if he had defeated them on battlefield, he always treated them with respect. He has not touched the Rajput women and children, and he has respected them, and thus he has tried to gain their help in his nation building activities. And the third class is like the rulers of Mewar, who have not whom the Akbar has not been able to defeat, and with whom Akbar has fought constantly. Now the second class, where Akbar defeats them but treats them with respect and does not execute them, even if they are Hindus and not Muslims, was supposedly against the ideas of Islam, and that's why the mullahs and maulavis of Akbar's time have cursed Akbar, but still Akbar has gone forward with his plan. Now why this Rajput policy, or why this is called a deliberate Rajput policy, is because it is this Akbar's cooperation, Akbar's taking cooperation of Rajputs has helped Akbar tremendously in building his nation, building his empire. Firstly, because the Rajputs are, as we have discussed before, valiant fighters, so they have helped Akbar. Secondly, by eliminating the threat, by eliminating with these three different policies the Rajput menace, what has Akbar secured is Akbar has secured a long-term peace with this. Thirdly, by adopting the various tactics of religious toleration, or adopting the policy of religious toleration, Akbar has also secured trust of the Rajput rulers and trust of the Rajput population, and that has helped in Akbar being the great national ruler that he later did. So as we are discussing right now, the second part of Akbar's the second part that has contributed immensely to Akbar becoming a national leader or a national ruler is Akbar's religious policy. So we'll look at Akbar's religious policy, and as we have seen the Amber incidents, the marriage of the daughter of the Raja of Amber with Akbar, the Rajput queen, and also the way in which the Amber rulers have treated Akbar, the way in which the Amber armies have fought with Akbar, have had a tremendous impact on Akbar's mind and psyche, and that has helped also in taming his religious policy. When we are talking about Akbar's religious policy, there are 2 or 3 stages in which we can see the development of this religious policy. Before that, we have to look at the character of Akbar. Akbar's character or Akbar's upbringing has something to do with the way in which he went ahead in developing his religious policy. First of all, Akbar was born in the homes of one of the Hindu kings. A lot of Akbar's wives were Hindu. They were Rajputs and thus Hindu, and this has had a very fine impact on Akbar's psyche, and that has later helped him in building his religious policy. Now the first stage of Akbar's religious policy is when we see him abolishing the pilgrimage tax. Now pilgrimage tax is something that the Hindus had to pay if they wanted to go to some pilgrimage to holy places, and there were 2 or 3 categories of Hindus that were made according to their economic status, and the tax that they would pay differ based on in which category they follow. So the poor pay the least pilgrimage tax and the richest pay the more. Also, we see Akbar abolishing jizya, which was a derogatory and which was a very Islamic tax that was being laid down on the non-Islamic people of and especially the Hindu people in the Islamic kingdoms. And Akbar has abolished jizya. Another thing that happened in this first stage is the establishment of Ibadat Khana. This happened in 1575. Now, what is a Ibadat Khana? In his palace, Akbar built a place where people would come to people would gather together and discuss various questions of theology. Now, at the first stage, at the very beginning, the Ibadat Khana would hold discussions regarding Islam only. So, there would be people of various Islamic sects. So there would be Sufis and there would be Shias and Sunnis who would sit together and who would talk about and who would discuss about various questions pertaining to specifically Islam, various theological questions pertaining specifically to Islam. Now there are incidences written by Abul Fazl, who mentions that at one point Akbar saw the leaders of both these sects, the scholars of both these sects, the Shias and the Sunnis, fighting with each other, and which also defeated the purpose of Ibadat Khana. And after that, Akbar made a deliberate attempt to include not only the Muslim theologists but also the Hindus and the Christians and the Jews to be included in the Ibadat Khana, and that's the beginning of the second stage of Akbar's evolution of a religious policy. So the Ibadat Khana now became a place where people and scholars of all the religions gather together and they talk with each other and they discuss various philosophical, theosophical and religious questions. Akbar was seen quite in the company of Ibadat Khana. He would sit hours and hours together in Ibadat Khana and he would discuss these questions. He would listen to these discussions in Ibadat Khana. This takes us to the second stage of Akbar's religious policy, which is called the issue of a mahzar. A mahzar is also called an infallibility treaty, but infallibility decree, but that is not a right nomenclature. Now, what's a mahzar or what's the issue of mahzar? In the Islamic states, the matter of religion is in the hands of the ulemas, the qazis and the maulavis. What Akbar did through this mahzar is that he gave to himself the ultimate right to decide on any question of even of the judicial or the religious matter. Now, what happened was, traditionally this right has been preserved for the mullahs and the maulavis. So they were definitely not happy with Akbar's Akbar's move. But when some of the authors say that this is an infallibility decree, what they mean is that Akbar became the supreme religious leader as well, which was not the case, because even when Akbar gave him the ultimate right to decide on some matter, he could only exercise that right when there is a difference between two or the three qazis and maulavis. So he only had, in the modern sense of the word, the appellate jurisdiction, one might say. Also, Akbar could only choose between either of the opinions that the two. So let's say there are two qazis who have two different opinions about the same theosophical matter or the same religious or judicial matter. What would Akbar do, or what the mahzar gave Akbar the right to do, is to choose between either of the two matters which have already been discussed by or which have already been stated by the qazis. So why then mahzar becomes very important? Because it curbed the menace that religiously fanatic mullahs or maulavis would have had if Akbar had not gotten this power for himself. And the third stage of Akbar's religious policy is Din-e-Ilahi. Now, Din-e-Ilahi is loosely termed as a new religion, but it wasn't a religion per se, but it was more accurately the structure of Din-e-Ilahi, or the essence of Din-e-Ilahi is people who have gone beyond the narrow aspects of their religion would come together, and it was a conglomeration of such people. There was no if Akbar wanted to force upon his population Din-e-Ilahi, he was in a very capable position to do so. But we are told that by Abul Fazl that there were only 18 people in Akbar's time who had accepted Din-e-Ilahi, and there was only one Hindu in them, Raja Birbal. So Din-e-Ilahi was less of a religion and more of a conglomeration of a people who have risen above their respective religions. Din-e-Ilahi taught universal brotherhood. Din-e-Ilahi was being contributed by various religions and the philosophies of various religions. The motive behind Din-e-Ilahi was Akbar thought that religion is the reason why people get divided into different groups. So why not use the same religion to unite people? And that's Din-e-Ilahi. How did Akbar's religious policy help in his rule as a consolidator of a national rule? Because it made the Hindu people realize, or it made the Hindu people believe that this is as much your empire as it is of your fellow Muslim citizen, because till then the Hindus were discriminated, and with Akbar's deliberate policy of stopping that discrimination and making Rajputs one of his strongest allies, have helped in consolidating his empire. This is also being seen in the art and cultural developments that happened during the time of Akbar. For example, painting was forbidden during the time of Akbar. Painting was forbidden by Islam, but Akbar started the art of painting. So the very beginning of Mughal painting happened during the time of Akbar. Some of the famous painters of his time are Mir Sayyid Ali and Khwaja Abdus Samad. Sant Tulsidas, who wrote the Tulsi Ramayan, is also the contemporary of Akbar. In this regard, or in this video, we saw how the religious toleration, the policy of religious toleration and the policy that he adopted towards Rajputs have helped Akbar in consolidating his empire and building a strong empire. In the next video, we will see his revenue policies, his civil administration and the Mansabdari system. Thank you for watching.